The desert sky was burning. Not the gentle kind of burning that tourists photograph from hotel balconies and post with captions about gratitude and living their best lives. This was the kind of burning that makes you feel small. The kind that stretches orange and violet and deep, ancient red across the entire horizon like God took a match to the atmosphere and decided to let it smolder. Scottsdale sunsets do that. They don't set quietly. They rage. Gloria Tate sat on the rooftop terrace of a private restaurant she hadn't known existed until 3 hours ago, watching that sky burn and trying to understand how she'd gotten here. Not here as in this rooftop. She understood the logistics of that. A black car had picked her up from her apartment in Old Town, driven her 12 minutes to a building with no signage, and an elevator had delivered her to this terrace where a single table was set for two. White linen. Candles that the wind couldn't touch because they were encased in glass. A bottle of wine she couldn't pronounce and wouldn't dare ask the price of. No, she understood the how. What she didn't understand was the why. Why was she here, sitting across from Minjun Yun, a man whose name made boardrooms go quiet, whose reputation preceded him like a cold front rolling in off the Pacific, on the 11th night since they'd met? Why had he invited her? Why had she said yes? And why, despite every rational thought she'd had since accepting, did she feel like she was exactly where she was supposed to be? Minjun sat across from her. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt undone, which for him was practically casual. His black hair was pushed back from his forehead. His hands rested on the table, still and precise, the way everything about him was still and precise. He was watching the sunset too, but his face gave nothing away. It never did. That was the thing about Minjun Yun that nobody talked about, or maybe everybody noticed, but nobody had the nerve to mention. He never smiled. Not once, not in 11 days, not when his associates laughed too loud at dinner parties and slapped each other on the back and ordered another round. Not when a deal closed and his team celebrated. Not when someone told a joke or paid him a compliment or tried, desperately, the way people do around powerful men, to earn his approval. And not when Gloria sang. That was the part that stuck with her, because Gloria had seen what her voice did to people. She'd watched grown men cry in church pews. She'd seen women close their eyes and sway like the melody was holding them upright. She'd seen strangers mouth the words to songs they'd never heard before because something in her voice made them feel like they already knew the words. Her voice was the one gift she'd never doubted, even when she doubted everything else about herself. But when she'd sung at the private event where they first met, when she'd stood on that small stage and poured herself into 3 songs, the last one a song she'd written from the wreckage of her own heartbreak, Minjun's face had stayed the same. Calm, controlled, unreadable, like a man who had decided a long time ago that joy was something he couldn't afford. Except she'd caught something. From the stage, under the lights, while her voice climbed into the high notes of her original song, she'd looked out into the audience and found him. He was standing at the back of the room, slightly apart from everyone else, a glass of something dark in his hand, and his face was still, but his eyes weren't. His eyes were doing something she couldn't name, something that looked like hunger, or recognition, or pain, or all 3 braided together into a single, unblinking stare that made her fingers falter on the guitar strings for half a second before she recovered. Nobody else would have caught it, but Gloria caught it, because Gloria had spent her whole life reading the things people tried to hide. Now, on this rooftop, 11 days later, with nobody else around and the sky burning down around them, she decided she was done wondering. She set her glass down. The wine was extraordinary, something dark and French and layered, but she wasn't interested in wine right now. She leaned forward, placed both hands flat on the white linen, and looked Minjun dead in the eyes. "Can I ask you something?" Minjun's gaze shifted from the skyline to her face. He didn't blink. He didn't nod. He just waited, the way he always waited, like patience was a weapon and he'd mastered it. "Why don't you ever smile?" The question landed on the table between them like a stone dropped into still water. Gloria watched the ripple hit him. It was subtle, almost invisible, but she saw it. His jaw tightened, just barely. The muscle along the side of his face flexed once and then locked. His fingers, which had been resting on the table, curled inward by a fraction of an inch. And his eyes, those dark, still, unreadable eyes, shifted away from her for the first time all evening. He looked out toward the Scottsdale skyline. The sky was deepening now, the orange giving way to purple, the purple bleeding into the first bruise of night. Gloria waited. She didn't fill the silence. She'd learned a long time ago, singing in churches and performing on stages and surviving a man who weaponized words, that silence was a language too. And sometimes it said more than anything. Minjun was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the candle between them flickered through an entire cycle. Long enough that Gloria could hear the faint hum of traffic from the streets below, and the distant sound of someone laughing somewhere in the building beneath them, and her own heartbeat in her ears. Then he spoke. And what he told her was so quiet, so devastating, so wrapped in the kind of pain that doesn't scream but sits in a room like smoke. The kind you don't see until it's already in your lungs, that Gloria felt something inside her chest crack open. He told her about an 8-year-old boy standing on a porch, holding a drawing. He told her about a car pulling out of a driveway and disappearing around a corner. He told her about waiting 3 hours on that porch, holding that drawing, believing the way only children can believe that if he just waited long enough, she would come back. She didn't come back. And then he told her what his father said to him that night. The sentence that rewired his entire nervous system, that taught an 8-year-old boy to lock every door inside himself and throw away every key. Stop crying. Yun men don't cry, and they don't smile at people who leave. Minjun looked back at Gloria. His eyes were glassy. Not crying, Minjun Yun did not cry in front of people, perhaps did not cry at all, but glassy. Like the tears were there, behind the glass, pressing against it. I stopped smiling that day, he said. Not because my father told me to, because I decided that if I never smiled at anyone, it wouldn't hurt as much when they left. He paused. The muscle in his jaw worked again. Everyone leaves, Gloria. Gloria didn't realize she was crying until she felt the tear hit the back of her hand. She looked down at it, surprised, and then looked back up at him. This man. This impossible, guarded, armored man who ran a billion-dollar empire and made grown men nervous and hadn't smiled in 23 years because an 8-year-old boy made a decision on a porch in Washington state, and the man he became never overruled it. She reached across the table and took both of his hands. He flinched, actually flinched at the contact, but he didn't pull away. Gloria looked at him and said something she had never said to anyone in her life. Not to Wesley, who had demanded it from her daily. Not to her mother, who had earned it and deserved it. Not to any man in any moment ever. I'm not everyone, she said, and I promise you I will never leave you. Minjun looked at her. His lip trembled for just a second, a fracture in the mask, a hairline crack in 23 years of concrete. And then, barely, just barely, the corner of his mouth lifted. It was not a smile. It was the ghost of one. The memory of what a smile used to feel like, surfacing for just a moment before diving back down. But Gloria saw it, and she knew what it cost him. Here's the thing, though. That promise, those 6 words, nearly destroyed them both. That promise almost cost Gloria everything she'd rebuilt since leaving Atlanta. It almost brought Minjun's empire to its knees. It dragged both of them through a fire that neither of them saw coming. And to understand why, to understand how a promise made on a burning rooftop in Scottsdale could detonate 2 lives, we need to go back 11 days. 11 days earlier, Gloria Tate was standing in a bathroom at the Scottsdale Palomar Resort, staring at herself in a mirror and giving herself the kind of pep talk that only women who have rebuilt their lives from rubble know how to give. You sound good, you look good. You're going to walk out there, sing 3 songs, collect your check, and go home. That's it. That's the whole thing. She adjusted the strap of her black dress, simple, fitted, elegant enough for a high-end event, but not so expensive that she'd panic if she spilled something on it. Her locks were pulled up and pinned, exposing the line of her neck, and her makeup was minimal because Gloria had learned a long time ago that her face didn't need much help. What it needed was rest, and she'd actually gotten some for once, and it showed. She was 26 years old. She had warm brown skin that caught light like it was doing it a favor. She had a voice that could silence a room, and tonight she was going to use it. The event was a private dinner hosted by something called the Yun Group, a Korean-American conglomerate that Gloria's booking agent had described as very serious people with very serious money. The gig paid $4,000 for 3 songs. Gloria had almost dropped her phone when she saw the number. That was more than she made in a month doing vocal coaching sessions and the occasional wedding performance. She'd moved to Arizona from Atlanta 8 months ago with 2 suitcases, her car, and the kind of emotional damage that doesn't show up on an X-ray. She'd left behind a man named Wesley Porter who had spent 3 years systematically dismantling her confidence, her finances, and her sense of self. She'd rebuilt slowly, carefully, brick by brick. The vocal coaching, the small gigs, the apartment in Old Town that she could barely afford, but that was hers, entirely hers and nobody else's. $4,000 for 3 songs. She'd have been a fool to say no. The event was in one of the resort's private ballrooms, intimate, maybe 60 people, all of them radiating the particular energy of wealth that doesn't need to announce itself. Gloria had performed for crowds like this before. They were the hardest audiences. Rich people didn't clap because they were impressed. They clapped because it was expected. The trick was to make them forget they were rich for 3.5 minutes. Make them feel something that money couldn't manufacture. Gloria walked to the small stage. A single stool, a microphone, a monitor. She'd requested no backing track for the first 2 songs, just her voice and a guitar. The 3rd song, her original, she'd perform with a pre-recorded arrangement. She'd produced herself in her apartment using software and headphones and sheer stubbornness. She sat down. She adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the room. And she saw him. Minjun Yun was standing at the back of the room, slightly apart from the clusters of guests who were finding their seats. He was tall, taller than she'd expected for some reason, maybe 6'1", and he had the kind of build that suggested discipline rather than vanity. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved, dark eyes that were already fixed on her with an intensity that made the back of her neck prickle. She didn't know who he was yet. She just knew that he was watching her like he'd been waiting for her, which was absurd because they'd never met. She sang. The first song was a jazz standard, My Funny Valentine, stripped down, slowed down, reharmonized in a way that made it feel less like a love song and more like a eulogy. She watched the room go quiet. Good. The second song was a soul classic, Etta James, I'd Rather Go Blind, which Gloria had been singing since she was 15 and which she could deliver in her sleep, but chose not to because every performance deserved her full presence. The room leaned in. Better. The 3rd song was not on the set list. The client had approved 3 covers, but Gloria always ended with something original. It was her signature. It was her rule. If they wanted a jukebox, they could hire one. She introduced the song simply. I wrote this one. It's called Still Water. She pressed play on the arrangement. A soft piano line, a bass note that hummed in your chest, and then her voice, climbing, reaching into the part of the melody where words stop being words and become something physical, something that lives in the air between the singer and the listener like a shared breath. The song was about leaving, about walking away from someone you loved because staying was killing you. About the moment you close the door and the silence on the other side is so loud it sounds like screaming. Gloria sang it with her eyes mostly closed, but at one point during the bridge she opened them, and she found him again, Minjun, still standing at the back, still watching, and his face, she would think about this for days afterward, his face was completely still. No reaction, no movement, nothing. But his eyes were drowning. The song ended, the room erupted, a standing ovation. Gloria smiled, thanked them, and stepped off the stage. Her hands were trembling slightly, they always did after a performance. The adrenaline needed somewhere to go. She was heading toward the side exit when a young man in a sharp suit intercepted her. Korean American, maybe late 20s, with round glasses and an earpiece that suggested he was someone's assistant. Miss Tate, Mr. Yun would like a word. Gloria followed him through a corridor and into a private lounge. The room was small, tasteful, lit by a single floor lamp, and the ambient glow of the Scottsdale night through a floor-to-ceiling window. Minjun was standing by that window, his back to her. When the assistant closed the door, Minjun turned around. Up close, the stillness of his face was even more pronounced. It wasn't blankness. Gloria had seen blank faces, had lived with a man whose face went blank before he said the cruelest things. This was different. This was control, intention. A man who had decided exactly how much of himself the world was allowed to see, and the answer was almost nothing. "You changed one of the songs," he said. His voice was low, not cold, not warm, precise. "The third one wasn't on the set list." Gloria's heart was hammering, but she kept her face even. "I always end with something original. It's my signature." "You didn't clear it with the event coordinator?" "No." "Why not?" "Because if I'd asked, they would have said no. And the song was better than whatever was on that approved list." A long beat of silence. Minjun studied her face like he was reading a contract, looking for the fine print, the clauses, the hidden liabilities. Then he said, "I'd like you to perform at 3 more events this month. My assistant will send you the details." That was it. No compliment. No, you were wonderful. No, that third song moved me. Just a business proposition delivered with the emotional temperature of a boardroom memo. Gloria nodded. "I'll look at the schedule." She turned to leave. She was almost at the door when his voice stopped her. "The song, Still Water, who did you write it for?" Gloria looked over her shoulder. Minjun hadn't moved. He was still standing by the window, outlined by the night. "Someone I had to leave," she said. She walked out. In her car, driving back to her apartment with the windows down and the desert air rushing through, Gloria replayed the interaction 6 times. She dissected his tone, his posture, his questions. She thought about his eyes during her performance. She thought about the way he'd asked about the song, not casually, not as small talk, but like the answer mattered. And she thought, who are you, Minjun Yun? She didn't know yet, but she was going to find out. The first event was a corporate dinner in Beverly Hills, California. A private estate in the hills that the Yun Group used for client entertainment, all glass and stone and infinity edges that made it look like the house was dissolving into the Lowe's Angels skyline. 70 guests. Tech executives, real estate developers, international investors. Money moved through the room like a current. Gloria could practically hear it humming. She performed her 3 songs. This time, she cleared the third original with Derek Bay, Minjun's assistant, the young man with the round glasses. Derek had smiled when she'd asked and said, "Mr. Yoon already told me to approve whatever you want to play." That stopped her for a second. She filed it away. After the performance, Minjun found her near the bar. He was holding a glass of water, not alcohol, she noticed. He asked her where she learned to sing. She told him about her grandmother, Lorraine Tate, who ran the choir at Greater Mount Calvary Baptist Church in Atlanta for 31 years, who taught Gloria to sing before she taught her to read, who used to say, "The voice is the one thing nobody can take from you, baby. They can take your money, your man, your house, and your health, but they cannot take what God put in your throat." Minjun listened, said nothing, but he didn't walk away. And when Gloria finished talking, he was still looking at her, and she had the strangest feeling that she'd just given him something he didn't know how to hold. The second event was a business reception in San Jose. Gloria arrived and was escorted to a private dressing room that had been prepared specifically for her. Fresh flowers, a fruit and cheese spread, sparkling water in glass bottles, a handwritten note on the vanity that said, "Thank you for being here, YG." This was not how hired performers were treated. Gloria knew that. She'd performed at events where she was told to use the service entrance and eat in the kitchen. This was something else. During the reception, she performed and it went beautifully. Afterward, while she was standing near a window texting her booking agent, a man approached her. An investor, white, mid-50s, 2 drinks past his limit. He leaned in too close and said, "You've got a hell of a voice for a girl from," and then he said something about where she was really from, with the kind of emphasis that left no room for misinterpretation. Gloria felt her stomach drop. Not from surprise, she'd heard variations of this her entire career, but from the exhaustion of it. The grinding, relentless exhaustion of being reduced. Before she could respond, Minjun was there. She hadn't seen him cross the room. He was just suddenly beside her, and the air around him had changed. It was colder, denser, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in his immediate radius. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch the man. He simply said, in that low, precise tone, "Your invitation to this and all future Yun Group events is revoked, effective immediately." The man sputtered. "Now wait a minute, Yun, I was just..." "Security will escort you out. Your car will be brought around." 2 men in dark suits appeared. The investor was guided away, still protesting. The room barely noticed. That was the thing about Minjun. He handled things so cleanly, so surgically, that the operation was over before anyone realized it had happened. Minjun didn't look at Gloria after. He just walked away, back to his conversation with a group of Japanese executives, as if nothing had occurred. But something had occurred, and Gloria felt it in her chest like a key turning in a lock she'd forgotten was there. Between the second and third events, they started texting. Minjun's messages were clipped and formal. "Confirming your arrival time for Friday. The venue has a piano if you prefer that to guitar." Gloria, being Gloria, ignored the formality entirely. She sent him a voice note of herself humming a melody she was working on, something half-formed and fragile, the kind of thing she normally kept private. He didn't respond for 6 hours. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Then her phone buzzed. "One line. Play that one at the next event." Gloria stared at the text for a long time. Then she smiled, a real, wide, helpless smile, and saved the message. The third event was in Palo Alto, at a Yun Group property that felt more like a home than a venue. Smaller, warmer. After Gloria performed, Minjun asked her to stay, not for business, just to talk. They sat outside on a terrace overlooking a garden that smelled like jasmine and eucalyptus. The Northern California night was cool and quiet. Gloria, unable to help herself, started asking him real questions. Not about work, about him. "What's your favorite food?" "Donjang-jjigae. My grandmother made it." "Favorite city?" Long pause. "Lisbon." "Siblings?" "No." "Pets?" The faintest flicker of something in his eyes. "I had a dog when I was young, a Jindo, named him Baram." "What happened to him?" "My father gave him away. He said animals were a distraction." Gloria's heart clenched. She didn't say she was sorry, she sensed he would hate that. Instead she said, "Baram, that means wind, right?" Minjun looked at her. For the first time, she saw surprise on his face, genuine, unguarded surprise that cracked through the mask for a full second before he recovered. "You speak Korean." "I know about 12 words. My friend in Atlanta was Korean. She taught me the important ones." Gloria paused. "Wind is important." Something moved behind Minjun's eyes, something warm, but his face didn't change. As she was leaving, he walked her to her car. The night was quiet. She could hear crickets and somewhere in the distance, a fountain. Minjun said, "I don't usually ask people to stay." Gloria turned to look at him. He was standing under a porch light that turned his sharp features softer, almost gentle. "Then why did you ask me?" He didn't answer. He just watched her get in the car and drive away. That night, back in her apartment in Scottsdale, Gloria did something she'd been resisting. She Googled Minjun Yun. What she found was a wall of business articles, Fortune profiles, Forbes estimates, conference keynotes, negotiations that had made headlines. A man who had inherited a company at 24 after his father's sudden cardiac arrest and turned it into one of the most formidable private business empires on the West Coast. Automotive manufacturing, commercial real estate development, international finance. The Yun Group had tentacles everywhere, and Minjun sat at the center of it like a spider who'd built the web so perfectly that he never needed to move. People called him cold, calculating, ruthless in negotiation, untouchable. He had no public relationships, no scandals, no social media presence. He was, by all accounts, a ghost in a suit, visible only when he chose to be, and what he chose to show was only ever business. Then she found the photo. It was from a news article 7 years old. Minjun at his father's funeral. He was 24, standing alone at the gravesite. No family beside him, no hand on his shoulder. Just Minjun in a black coat, standing over a hole in the earth that held the man who'd made him. And his face showed nothing. Gloria stared at that photo for a long time. Then she closed her laptop, lay back on her bed, and stared at the ceiling. She knew what it looked like when someone had walled themselves off from the world. She knew it because she'd done it herself, for years, behind Wesley's closed doors. The difference was that Gloria had escaped her walls. Minjun was still inside his. Minjun invited Gloria to a fourth event, but this one wasn't business. It was a private dinner, just the two of them. A penthouse restaurant in San Francisco with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the bay that made the city look like it was floating on dark water. Gloria wore a deep green dress that she'd bought specifically for the occasion, and then spent 20 minutes trying to convince herself she hadn't. Minjun was wearing something slightly less formal than usual, a dark sweater over a collared shirt, no jacket. For him, this was practically undressed. He pulled her chair out. He asked what she wanted to eat instead of ordering for her. He poured her wine and waited until she tasted it before he poured his own. These were small things, tiny things, but Gloria understood that for a man who controlled everything, who moved through the world with the precision of a machine, choosing to yield on even the smallest details was seismic. During dinner, she pushed further. She asked about his childhood. Minjun tensed, his shoulders pulled back slightly, but he answered. He told her about growing up, structured. His father, Yoon Sang-ho, had been a first-generation immigrant who arrived in the United States at 22 with $800 and a mechanical engineering degree from Seoul National University. He started with a single car dealership in Bellevue, Washington. Through relentless work, strategic ruthlessness, and a refusal to accept any outcome he hadn't engineered himself, he built the Yoon Group into a multi-billion-dollar operation. Minjun was his only son. He was groomed to take over from the age of 10. There were no days off, no sleepovers, no little league, just tutors and business dinners he was required to attend, and weekends spent at the company offices learning operations while other kids rode bikes. His father's philosophy was simple. The world is a machine. You are either the one who builds the machine or the one who gets crushed by it. There is no in-between. "What about your mom?" Gloria asked. Minjun's face went completely blank. The wall slammed down so fast that Gloria almost felt the impact. "She left when I was 8, he said. Silence. Gloria didn't push. She just reached across the table and placed her hand near his, not touching, just close. An offering, a door left open. Minjun looked down at her hand. His jaw worked. He didn't move, but he didn't pull away. After dinner, they walked to the valet. The San Francisco night was cool and sharp, the kind of cold that clears your head. Gloria was about to say something about the food when a woman stepped out of the shadows near the restaurant entrance. She was Korean, elegantly dressed, mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a low chignon and the kind of bone structure that made it clear she had once been strikingly beautiful. She still was. "Minjun," she said. Minjun froze. Gloria had never seen him freeze before. The man who moved through the world like nothing could touch him went absolutely rigid, every muscle in his body locking at once. "It's been a long time," the woman said. Her voice was careful, measured, but underneath it Gloria could hear something fragile, something that was trying very hard not to break. Minjun's voice went ice cold, colder than Gloria had ever heard it. Not long enough. The woman's eyes shifted to Gloria, then back to Minjun. "We need to talk. It's about the company." Minjun took Gloria's arm firmly, not roughly, but with a grip that communicated urgency, and walked her to the car without another word. He opened the door for her, waited for her to get in, and then got in beside her. He said nothing to the driver. The car pulled away. They drove in silence for 2 blocks. Minjun stared straight ahead. His jaw was locked. His left hand, resting on his knee, was trembling slightly. Gloria noticed. She didn't mention it. Finally, she asked quietly, "Who was that?" Minjun didn't look at her. His voice was flat, empty, stripped of everything. "My mother." The rest of the drive was silent. Back in Scottsdale the next day, Gloria's phone rang from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She'd been screening calls for 8 months, ever since she'd left Atlanta, because some part of her had always known this call would come. "Gloria." Wesley's voice, smooth as silk, warm as poison. "Hey, Glo, I've been worried about you. Just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay." Her throat closed. 8 months of distance, 8 months of rebuilding, 8 months of convincing herself she was free, and the sound of his voice collapsed it all in 3 seconds. "Don't call me again," she said. "Gloria, baby, She hung up. Her hands were shaking. She stared at her phone for a long time, then set it face down on the table and pressed her palms flat against the surface until they stopped trembling. She didn't tell Minjun. Over the next few days, Minjun pulled back. The texts stopped. A dinner they'd planned was canceled with a single message from Derek. "Mr. Yun sends his apologies. Something has come up." The warmth, the small, hard-won, barely there warmth that Gloria had started to feel from him, went cold. Like a door that had been cracking open suddenly slammed shut and was bolted from the inside. Gloria didn't chase him. She knew what shutting down looked like. She knew the architecture of emotional withdrawal intimately because she'd built her own version of it during the worst years with Wesley. You pull back. You go quiet. You convince yourself that the silence is protection when really it's a cage. She gave Minjun space. It cost her something, but she gave it. Then Derek called her, not from Minjun's phone, from his own. "Ms. Tate, I'm sorry to contact you like this, but I'm worried about him." Derek told her that Minjun hadn't been himself since the encounter with his mother in San Francisco. He wasn't sleeping. He was working 20-hour days. He'd snapped at 3 senior executives in a meeting, something he never did because Minjun's power had always come from his composure, not his temper. And then Derek told her something that no one outside Minjun's inner circle knew. His mother, Helen, she didn't just leave, Derek said carefully. Mr. Yoon Sang-ho, the father, he gave her an ultimatum. He told her she could be a mother or she could be involved in the business expansion, but not both. He wanted complete control of Minjun's upbringing, no interference, no maternal softness. He told her that if she stayed and tried to raise Minjun her way, he would cut off her entire family in Korea, her parents, her sister, everyone. Gloria sat down slowly. She was under enormous pressure, Derek continued. Her father was ill. Her family needed Sang-ho's financial support, so she made the decision to walk away. She's regretted it every day since. But Minjun doesn't know the full story. All he knows is that his mother left and never came back. "Why are you telling me this?" Gloria asked. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because he thinks he's unlovable. He's thought that since he was 8 years old, he'll never say it, he'll never admit it. But that's what's underneath everything. And I've worked for him for 5 years, and you're the first person I've ever seen get through to him." Gloria sat in her apartment for a long time after that call. She stared at the ceiling. She thought about an 8-year-old boy standing on a porch. She thought about a woman driving away from her own child. She thought about the kind of pain that doesn't heal because nobody ever touches it. It just sits there, calcifying year after year, hardening into something that looks like strength, but is really just scar tissue. She made a decision. She drove to Paradise Valley, to Minjun's estate. It was hidden behind walls and mature landscaping, the way wealth always hides itself in Arizona, behind gates and desert trees, and the polite fiction that everyone here is just like everyone else. Security stopped her. She told them to call Minjun and tell him Gloria was here. 5 minutes passed. She sat in her car with the engine running, half expecting the gate to stay closed, half expecting him to refuse her the way he refused everything that got too close. The gate opened. She found him in his home office, surrounded by documents and screens. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were shadowed. His shirt was wrinkled, which for Minjun was the equivalent of complete collapse. "You shouldn't have come," he said without looking up. "And yet here I am." "I'm busy, Gloria." "You're hiding." He looked up then. His eyes were sharp, dangerous even, the look he probably gave to people across boardroom tables right before he dismantled their positions. "I don't hide," he said. "Then why haven't you answered my calls? Why'd you cancel dinner? Why are you sitting in this room at 11 o'clock at night pretending that if you work hard enough, you won't have to feel anything?" Silence, the kind of silence that could go either way, toward a door opening or a door slamming. Minjun leaned back in his chair. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said quietly like a confession, "Everyone goes, eventually. Everyone leaves." Gloria sat down across from him. She didn't break eye contact. "Then I'll be the first one who doesn't." He stared at her. She stared back. And something in the room shifted, not dramatically, not with thunder and lightning, but the way dawn shifts the sky. Gradually, inevitably, one shade at a time. That night, Gloria drove home and found a text from Wesley on her phone. New number. Not the one she'd blocked. The message said, "I know you blocked me. That's okay. I'm patient." She deleted it. But the anxiety settled into her chest like a stone, and she lay awake until 3 in the morning, listening to the silence of her apartment and trying to convince herself that silence meant safety. The rooftop dinner happened 2 nights later. That was the night Gloria asked Minjun why he never smiled. That was the night he told her about the boy on the porch. That was the night she made her promise. And that was the night, while Minjun stepped away to take a business call, that Gloria checked her phone and saw the text from an unknown number. "Nice view from up there. I told you I was coming." Wesley was in Scottsdale. The next morning, Gloria was standing in line at the coffee shop she frequented near Old Town when she felt someone behind her. She turned around, and there he was. Wesley Porter, 6'2", lean, handsome in the way that dangerous men are often handsome, symmetrical features, easy smile, the kind of warmth in his eyes that you don't realize is manufactured until you've already trusted it. He was wearing a linen shirt and jeans, and he looked like he'd stepped out of a catalog, and for one terrible second, Gloria's body responded before her mind could catch up. Her heart rate spiked. Her stomach dropped, not from attraction, from fear. The body remembers before the brain does. "Glow," he said, smiling. "Don't panic, I just want to talk." "How did you find me?" "It's not hard to find someone when you know what to look for." He held up his hands. "I'm not here to cause problems. I went to therapy. I did the work. I'm different." "You're not different, Wesley. You're just in a different state." His smile stayed in place, but his eyes shifted. A hardening. A flash of the thing that lived underneath the charm. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." "No." "Gloria." "No." She stepped out of line. She walked toward the door. His voice followed her, low enough that no one else would hear but loud enough to stop her. "I know about your friend, the Korean guy, the rich one." A pause. "I'm not leaving without you." Gloria walked out. She drove to her apartment. She deadbolted the door, sat on her couch, and pulled her knees to her chest. Her hands were shaking again. She didn't call Minjun. She didn't want to bring her past into whatever this was. She thought she could handle it alone. She'd been handling everything alone for 8 months. For years before that, even while she was with Wesley, she'd been alone, just alone with someone standing next to her, which was the loneliest kind of alone there is. Meanwhile, Minjun was fighting his own war. Helen Yoon had resurfaced with lawyers. She was claiming that Sang-ho had altered the original company charter before his death to cut her out of her rightful stake in the Yoon Group. She wanted 30%. She was filing a formal claim. Minjun was furious. The anger radiated off him like heat off asphalt, silent, distorting, dangerous. He saw this as the ultimate betrayal. The woman who abandoned him, now coming back for money. His business advisors in Bellevue were urging him to settle quietly. Minjun refused. He wanted to fight it publicly. He wanted the world to see what she was. Derek warned him, "If this goes public, the media will dig into everything. Your personal life, your relationship with Gloria, everything." "I don't have a relationship." Minjun said flatly. Derek looked at him with the particular patience of a man who has spent 5 years translating his boss's lies back to him. He said nothing. He didn't need to. That evening, Gloria and Minjun had dinner at his Paradise Valley estate. Both of them were carrying weight they hadn't shared with each other. The dinner was tense. Minjun was distracted, shorter than usual in his responses. Gloria was checking her phone every few minutes, then setting it down too carefully. Finally, Minjun looked at her and said, "What's wrong?" And Gloria broke. She told him everything. Wesley. The 3 years of control and manipulation. How he'd monitored her phone, isolated her from friends, questioned every dollar she spent and every minute she couldn't account for. How he'd never hit her, he was too smart for that, but he dismantled her so methodically that by the end, she didn't trust her own perceptions. She told Minjun about the night she left, packing 2 suitcases while Wesley was at work, driving to Arizona without stopping because she was afraid that if she stopped, she'd turn around. And she told him Wesley was in Scottsdale, now looking for her. Minjun's transformation was immediate and total. The distraction, the short temper, the self-absorbed focus on his own problems, it all evaporated. What replaced it was something Gloria had only glimpsed before, the cold, precise, terrifying focus that made powerful men nervous. His voice dropped. His eyes went flat. "He won't come near you again," Minjun said. "Minjun, please don't. I'm not going to do anything violent." His voice was calm, absolute. "But I will make it very clear to this man that you are not alone anymore." He picked up his phone and made a single call. Within an hour, a private security detail was assigned to Gloria. A driver, a point of contact, someone watching always discreetly and professionally. Gloria sat in Minjun's kitchen that night, a kitchen that probably cost more than her entire apartment building, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just safety, not just protection, something deeper and more fundamental. The feeling of being seen by someone who had the power to act on what they saw. She looked at Minjun, who was across the kitchen making tea with the quiet efficiency he brought to everything, and she thought, "You have no idea what you just did for me. You have no idea what it means to feel safe." Wesley did not take the hint. 3 days after the security detail was assigned, he showed up at Gloria's apartment building. He walked through the lobby like he owned it, past the front desk, toward the elevator. Security intercepted him before he reached it. The encounter was loud. Wesley raised his voice, not screaming, never screaming, because Wesley was too calculated for that, but loud enough that residents in the lobby turned to look. He called Gloria's name. He said she was making a mistake. He said she was hiding behind some rich man, and that this isn't over. Security escorted him out. The incident was reported to Minjun's team within the hour. Minjun responded the way Minjun responded to everything, with surgical precision. His lawyers drafted a formal cease and desist. They filed for a restraining order on Gloria's behalf. The documents were delivered to Wesley's hotel room by a private courier before midnight. Wesley, cornered and humiliated, did something desperate. He contacted a gossip blog, one of those parasitic outlets that lives on rumor and spite, and fed them a story. The headline read, "Korean billionaire's new girlfriend, gold digger from Atlanta running from her past." He provided photos of Gloria from their relationship, images she hadn't consented to, taken during a time she was trying to forget. He twisted the narrative so completely that the woman in the article was unrecognizable. A schemer, a social climber, a woman using her body and her voice to claw her way into a rich man's life. The story went semi-viral. Not mainstream news, but enough. Enough that Gloria's phone started buzzing with messages from people she hadn't spoken to in months. Enough that the comments section filled with the kind of cruelty that strangers specialize in, reducing a woman they'd never met to a collection of assumptions based on her race, her background, and the man she was associated with. Gloria saw the article at 2 in the morning. She'd been unable to sleep and made the mistake of checking her phone. She read the headline. She read the comments. She read what Wesley had said about her, the version of her he'd constructed, the Gloria he'd always wanted her to be. Small, desperate, nothing without him. She called Minjun. It was the first time she'd ever called him crying. "I should leave," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm ruining your life. The article, the attention, you don't need this. Your company doesn't need this." Minjun's response was immediate. No hesitation, no calculation. "You promised me you would never leave. Did you mean it or not?" Gloria went quiet. She pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sob. "Did you mean it?" he repeated. "I meant it." "Then stop running. We handle this together." At the same time, Helen Yoon's lawyers were waging their own campaign. They leaked to business press that Minjun was emotionally compromised and that his involvement with a woman was affecting his judgment regarding the company dispute. They were building a narrative. Minjun was unstable, distracted, making decisions based on emotion rather than strategy. The implication was clear. A man like Minjun, falling for a woman like Gloria, was evidence of impaired judgment. Minjun was now fighting on two fronts, Wesley from one direction, his mother from the other, both of them trying to take something from him and both of them using Gloria as leverage. He wasn't sleeping. Derek could see it, the shadows under his eyes, the shorter fuse, the way Minjun stood at his office window for long stretches, staring at nothing. Derek had seen Minjun under pressure before. He'd watched him navigate hostile takeover attempts, regulatory challenges, and the death of his father. But he'd never seen him like this. Because this time, the thing under threat wasn't a company or a deal. It was a person, and Minjun didn't have a playbook for that. Gloria showed up at Minjun's office unannounced. She walked past the receptionist, who had been told by Derek to let her through, and found Minjun at his desk, surrounded by legal documents. She didn't come with comfort. She came with fire. "You need to stop," she said. He looked up. "Stop what?" "Trying to fight everything alone. Trying to be the only person in the room who handles things. You're doing the same thing you've done your whole life, carrying it all yourself because you don't trust anyone else to help." "I don't need help." "You don't need help." She repeated it back to him, flat, letting him hear how it sounded. "Minjun, I know what it's like to think you have to carry everything yourself. I did it for years with Wesley and it almost broke me. It did break me. I had to put myself back together piece by piece in a city where I didn't know anyone. So don't tell me you don't need help. I know what that lie sounds like because I used to tell it to myself every single day." Minjun stared at her. His jaw was tight. His eyes were hard. But he didn't interrupt her and he didn't look away, and Gloria knew that for Minjun, that was as close to listening as he got. She stepped closer. "You're so scared of people leaving that you push everyone away before they get the chance. Your mother left, so you decided everyone would. Your father taught you that strength means standing alone, so you've been standing alone for 23 years. But I'm still here, Minjun. I'm standing right here. So what are you going to do about it?" The office was quiet. The hum of the building. The distant sound of a phone ringing somewhere down the hall. The breath between two people who were terrified of the same thing, being left, and were choosing, despite that terror, to stay. Minjun looked at her, and for the second time since she'd known him, the corner of his mouth lifted. Barely, just a ghost. But it was there. Minjun's legal team didn't just file the restraining order against Wesley. They investigated him. Thoroughly. Methodically. The way Minjun investigated everything, leaving no stone unturned because an unturned stone was a liability. What they uncovered was damning. Wesley Porter had a pattern. 3 previous girlfriends before Gloria, all of whom he had manipulated and financially exploited. One woman in Charlotte had given him access to her savings account. He drained $16,000 before she realized what was happening. Another in Houston had co-signed a loan for him that she was still paying off 2 years after they'd broken up. The third, in Miami, had filed a police report that was mysteriously dropped. 2 of the 3 women were willing to provide formal statements. They'd been waiting, the way survivors often wait, for someone to ask, for someone to believe them, for someone with enough resources to make the asking matter. Minjun's lawyers compiled the evidence and arranged a meeting with Wesley at his hotel. They presented him with a choice. Leave Arizona permanently, delete all photos of Gloria, never contact her again, and sign a legal agreement to that effect, or face a coordinated legal case from multiple victims, including fraud charges related to financial exploitation. That would follow him for the rest of his natural life. Wesley's lawyer, a budget attorney he'd hired off the internet, took one look at the evidence and advised him to sign. Wesley tried to negotiate. Minjun's lawyers told him this was not a negotiation. Wesley signed. He was on a flight back to Atlanta by morning. Gloria got the call from Minjun's attorney at 9 a.m. She was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, staring at the morning light coming through the window. The attorney explained, in clear and professional terms, that Wesley Porter had signed a binding agreement and left the state. Gloria said, "Thank you." She hung up. She set the phone down, and she sat on the edge of her bed and cried not from sadness, not from fear, but from the overwhelming, tidal, full-body relief of being truly free for the first time in years. The kind of crying that doesn't have words. The kind that comes from a place deeper than language, where the body finally releases what the mind has been holding. She cried until she was empty. Then she washed her face, made a fresh cup of coffee, and called Minjun. "It's over," she said. "Yes," he said. A pause, then Gloria said, "Now deal with your mother." Minjun was quiet for a long time. Gloria could hear him breathing. She could picture him standing at a window somewhere, staring at a skyline, his face giving nothing away. "I don't know how," he said. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. "You don't have to know how. You just have to show up." With Gloria's encouragement, Minjun agreed to meet Helen Yun one more time before the legal battle went public. Not through lawyers, face to face. The meeting was arranged at a private conference room in a hotel in Bellevue, Washington, the same city where Minjun grew up. The same city where, 23 years ago, a woman drove away from a boy on a porch. Minjun flew up alone. Gloria offered to come. He told her this was something he needed to do by himself, and she understood, because she knew the difference between being alone and needing to be alone, and this was the latter. Helen was already in the conference room when Minjun arrived. She was sitting at the table with a folder in front of her. No lawyers this time, just her. She didn't start with a legal claim. She started with a letter. She slid a yellowed envelope across the table. Minjun looked at it but didn't touch it. "I wrote this to you the week I left," Helen said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "I gave it to your father to give to you. He never did." Minjun opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten in Korean, on paper that had aged to the color of old ivory. He read it slowly. His face didn't change, of course it didn't, but his hands started shaking halfway through. The letter was from a mother to her 8-year-old son. It said, "I am not choosing to leave you. I am being forced to. Your father has told me that if I stay, he will cut off Halmione and IMO, your grandmother and your aunt, from everything. They will have nothing. He wants to raise you his way, and he has told me I cannot be part of it. I am doing this to protect the people I love, and the person I love most is you. I am so sorry. I will find my way back to you. I promise. Please don't forget me." Minjun read the letter twice. Then he looked up at his mother. "I wrote you a letter every year on your birthday," Helen said. Tears were streaming down her face now, silently, the way tears fall when someone has been holding them for decades. "I sent them to the house, every year. Your father returned every single one." The room was silent. Minjun's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you fight harder?" Helen closed her eyes. "Because I was afraid. Your father was powerful. He had lawyers, resources, connections. I had nothing. And by the time I found my courage, by the time I had enough money, enough support, enough fight, you were already a man. And you already hated me. And I thought—" She stopped, composed herself. "I thought it was too late." Minjun stared at the letter in his hands. 23 years. 23 years of believing he was the kind of person that people left. 23 years of building walls, stacking them higher and higher until he couldn't see over them, until he forgot there was anything on the other side worth seeing. And the whole time, there had been a letter that said, "It wasn't about you. It was never about you." He didn't hug her. He didn't forgive her on the spot. That would have been dishonest, and whatever else Minjun was, he was not dishonest. but he said, "I need time." Helen nodded. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've waited 23 years. I can wait a little longer." Regarding the company claim, Minjun's lawyers reviewed the original charter documents Helen had provided. They brought in independent forensic analysts to examine the paperwork. The conclusion was clear. Sang-ho had altered the charter. Helen's claim was legitimate. She had been cut out of a stake that was rightfully hers. Minjun sat with this for 2 days. He sat with the fact that his father, the man who had shaped him, hardened him, built him into the person he was, had also been the man who had stolen from his mother, driven her away, and spent 23 years letting his son believe he was unlovable. The anger Minjun felt was not the cold, controlled kind he was known for. This was something rawer, something that burned. But he made a decision. He instructed his legal team to negotiate a fair settlement. Not 30%, Helen's lawyers had been aggressive, and Minjun's team countered, but a meaningful stake and a seat on the advisory board, a place at the table she'd been forced away from. Helen accepted. That night, Minjun called Gloria from his hotel room in Bellevue. His voice sounded different. Lighter. Not happy, not yet, but lighter. Like something heavy and jagged had been pulled out of his chest, and the wound, while still open, could finally start to breathe. He told her everything, the letter, what his father had done, the settlement. Gloria listened without interrupting. When he was done, the line was quiet for a moment. Then Gloria said, "I'm proud of you." Minjun went silent. Gloria could hear him breathing. She could hear the faint sounds of Bellevue at night through the hotel window, traffic, wind, the distant hum of a city carrying on. "Nobody's ever said that to me before," he said. "Then you've been around the wrong people." Another silence. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, Minjun laughed. Not a big laugh, not a loud one. Just a short, soft exhalation that carried the ghost of joy in it, the first laugh Gloria had ever heard from him. She pressed the phone against her ear and held it there, and she smiled in her empty apartment in Scottsdale, and she thought, there you are. 6 months later, Gloria's life was unrecognizable. It had started with a video. Someone at one of the Yun group events had recorded her performing Still Water on their phone and posted it to social media with the caption, "Who is this woman, and why does her voice sound like everything I've ever felt?" The video went viral in the way that genuine things go viral, not because of controversy or outrage, but because it was real. Because Gloria's voice, stripped of studio production and digital polish, was the kind of voice that made people stop scrolling and listen. Really listen. Within a week, she had 300,000 followers. Within a month, she'd been contacted by 7 labels. She signed with an independent outfit based in Los Angeles, a label that let her maintain creative control, that didn't ask her to change her sound or her image, that said, "We want you exactly as you are." Her first single was Still Here. She'd written it in her apartment in Scottsdale at 3 a.m, sitting on the floor with her guitar, thinking about promises and what it means to keep them. The song debuted to massive streaming numbers. Music reviewers used words like transcendent and once in a generation, and the kind of voice that makes you believe in God whether you want to or not. She was performing at venues she used to dream about. Real stages, real audiences, real sound systems that could carry her voice the way it deserved to be carried. But she hadn't left Scottsdale. She hadn't left Minjun. Not because she was dependent on him, not because she needed his money or his security or his name, but because she had made a promise on a rooftop under a burning sky, and Gloria Tate kept her promises. And because, the simpler, truer reason, she loved him. She loved this impossible, guarded, armored man who was slowly, painfully, bravely learning how to take the armor off. Minjun had changed too, not dramatically, not in a way that erased who he was or turned him into someone unrecognizable. He was still precise, still controlled, still the kind of man who walked into a room and rearranged its gravity. But the changes were there, in the spaces between, like new growth pushing through concrete. He called his mother once a week now. The conversations were short, sometimes awkward, full of long pauses and careful words, but they were happening. Every Sunday evening, Minjun picked up the phone and dialed a number he'd spent 23 years refusing to learn, and he said, "Hello, Mother," and Helen said, "Hello, my son," and they talked. About weather at first, about business, about small, safe things, and then gradually about bigger things, about the past, about Sangho. About the years they'd lost and whether it was possible not to get them back, because lost years don't come back, but to build something new in the space where they used to be. He'd started seeing a therapist. Gloria had suggested it, and he'd initially resisted with the quiet stubbornness of a man who had spent his entire life believing that strength meant handling everything alone. But she'd worn him down, not with arguments, but with her own honesty. She told him about the therapist she'd seen in Atlanta after leaving Wesley. She told him how it felt to sit in a room with a stranger and say the things she'd been afraid to say out loud. She told him it wasn't weakness. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Minjun went. He didn't talk about it much, but he went. Every Thursday at 4 o'clock, he left the office early and drove to an address in Scottsdale that nobody else knew, and he sat in a room with a woman named Dr. Park who spoke Korean and English and had the kind of patience that can hold a glacier and wait for it to melt. Derek noticed the changes. Of course he did. Derek noticed everything. Minjun was delegating more. He was leaving the office before midnight. He was asking people questions that had nothing to do with business. How was your weekend? And is your daughter feeling better? Small things, tiny things. But for a man who had spent 7 years running the Yun group like a machine, asking someone about their daughter's cold was an earthquake. One evening, Derek was packing up his desk when Minjun walked out of his office. He stopped in the doorway, as if he'd just remembered something. "Derek." "Yes, sir." "Thank you," a pause, "for calling Gloria that day, when I was," he stopped, started again, "when I needed someone and didn't know how to ask." Derek looked at him, then he smiled. "That's what I'm here for, sir." Minjun nodded once and walked out. Derek sat at his desk for a long time after that, doing nothing, feeling something he couldn't quite name. It felt like pride. It felt like watching someone you care about find the thing they've been missing. It felt like hope. The final scene happened on a Tuesday in October. Minjun told Gloria he wanted to take her somewhere. He didn't say where. He just said, "Pack for 2 days. Dress warm." Gloria, who had learned to trust his planning even when she didn't understand it, packed a bag and met him at the airport. They flew to Seattle. From Seattle, Minjun drove them east, across the bridge, into Bellevue. Gloria watched the landscape change, the urban density giving way to residential streets, the trees thickening, the sky turning the particular gray of the Pacific Northwest that feels less like weather and more like a mood. Minjun pulled up in front of a house. It was in a quiet neighborhood, older homes, large lots, the kind of street where you could hear birds. The house had been sold and renovated since he'd lived there. New paint, new windows, a different mailbox, but the porch was the same. The porch was the same. Gloria looked at Minjun. He was staring at the house through the windshield, his hands on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. She reached over and placed her hand on his arm. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to." They got out of the car. They walked up the front path together. The new owners weren't home. Minjun had arranged it because of course he had. They stepped onto the porch. It was a simple porch, wooden, wide enough for 2 chairs. There was a welcome mat and a potted plant and nothing remarkable about it whatsoever, except that it was the place where a boy's world had ended. Minjun stood on that porch. Gloria stood beside him. The Pacific Northwest sky was gray and soft above them, and the street was quiet, and somewhere a dog barked once and then fell silent. Minjun reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Gloria's breath caught. Her hand went to her mouth. But when he opened it, it wasn't a ring. Inside the box was a folded piece of paper. Gloria took it out with trembling fingers and unfolded it. It was a drawing, simple, almost childlike on purpose. She could tell it had been drawn by an adult hand deliberately choosing innocence over precision. 2 figures standing on a porch, one taller, one shorter. The shorter one had black hair. The taller one had locks. Above them, a sky. Below them, a step. and the taller figure was smiling. Gloria looked up at Minjun. Her vision was blurring. Her throat was tight. "Is this supposed to be us?" she whispered. Minjun looked at her, and for the first time fully, completely, without reservation, without the mask, without the wall, without 23 years of armor, he smiled. Not a half smile, not a flicker, not the ghost of something that might have been joy if joy weren't so dangerous. A real, full, warm smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. That made him look younger, softer, like the boy he might have been if the world had been kinder. A smile that had been locked inside him for more than 2 decades, waiting for someone brave enough to ask for it and patient enough to earn it. "You're the first person who made me want to try again," he said. Gloria threw her arms around him. She was crying and laughing simultaneously, the sounds mixing together into something that was neither and both, something that sounded like relief and joy and grief and gratitude all braided into a single, breathless noise. Minjun's arms came around her. He held her tightly, not the careful, measured hold of a man afraid to commit too much, but a real hold. A hold that said, "I'm here, I'm staying. You're not leaving, and neither am I." They stood on that porch for a long time. The sky stayed gray. The street stayed quiet. The world, for once, asked nothing of them. 1 year later, Napa Valley, California. The ceremony was private. 50 guests. A vineyard estate with rolling green hills and oak trees that had been growing for 100 years. The kind of place where time moves differently, slower, kinder, more forgiving. Gloria walked down the aisle in a simple white dress. No train, no veil, just the dress and her locks loose around her shoulders, and a pair of earrings her grandmother had given her before she passed small gold hoops that caught the afternoon light. Minjun was standing at the end of the aisle. He wore a dark suit with a white shirt, no tie, the top button undone. His hands were clasped in front of him. His back was straight. He looked exactly like the man Gloria had met 13 months ago, composed, controlled, precise. Except his eyes. His eyes were full. Helen Yun was in the second row. She was wearing a blue dress and her silver-streaked hair was down. Tears were streaming down her face silently, the way they had in that conference room in Bellevue, except this time they weren't tears of grief. She was watching her son stand at the end of an aisle, waiting for the woman who had unlocked something in him that Helen had spent 23 years believing was lost forever. Beside her, an empty chair with a single white flower on it. Nobody had asked Minjun to place it there. He'd done it himself that morning without explanation. Helen understood. Derek was Minjun's best man. He was standing to Minjun's left, wearing a suit that was slightly too big because he'd lost weight from the stress of planning this event, and he was trying not to cry and failing spectacularly. His round glasses kept fogging up. He kept taking them off and wiping them and putting them back on, and then they'd fog up again. It was, by any objective measure, a disaster of composure, and Derek didn't care even slightly. Gloria reached the end of the aisle. She stood in front of Minjun. He took her hands. His grip was warm and steady. She leaned in and whispered, "Are you going to smile for the photos?" Minjun looked at her. This woman. This extraordinary, stubborn, brave, impossibly beautiful woman who had walked into a private event 13 months ago and changed a song without permission. Who had asked him a question nobody else had the nerve to ask. Who had sat across a table from him on a rooftop in Scottsdale and promised she would never leave. And then, the hardest, most remarkable part, kept the promise. He smiled. Not the ghost of one, not the memory, the real thing. Full and warm and certain, the way smiles are supposed to be when they come from a place that has finally, after a long time in the dark, found its way to the light. "For you," he said, "always." The officiant said the words. The rings were exchanged. The kiss was soft and unhurried, the kind of kiss that isn't performing for an audience but simply continuing a conversation that started on a rooftop under a burning sky. The 50 guests clapped. Derek gave up entirely and cried openly. Helen pressed both hands over her heart and smiled through her tears. Somewhere in the vineyard, a bird sang. And Minjun Yun, standing on a green hillside in California with the hand of the woman he loved in his, smiled like a man who had finally, after 23 years, come home. If this story made you feel something, drop a comment and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the rooftop confession, the letter from his mother, or that final drawing on the porch? I genuinely read every single comment, and your words are what keep me making these stories. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, I really don't know what you're waiting for. This family is growing every single day, and I don't want you to miss the next story. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.